Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Rebecca, your host, and I recap live trials. If you are new, welcome. I am so glad to have you. It is free to subscribe. You just have to click that button. Yep. So currently covering the trial of Chad Daybell, who is charged with the conspiracy to commit the murder of Tylee Ryan, JJ Vallow, and Tammy Daybell. He is also charged with first-degree murder of Tylee Ryan, JJ Vallow, and Tammy Daybell. Now, Tylee and JJ were the children of his newest wife, Lori Daybell, who has already been tried and convicted of all this and is serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. Chad is facing the death penalty. Now, the reason Lori didn't get the death penalty is it was a technicality. Okay, so we'll just leave it at that. But he is facing the death penalty. So this is going to be quite a long trial. But today, I wanted to recap what happened on Friday. They had an FBI supervisor on the stand who was going over text messages between, well, just text messages between Lori and a bunch of people, and Lori and Chad, yeah, just lots of text messages, including some really salacious ones. I might add that, you know, there were texts going back and forth between Chad and Lori before Charles, her husband at the time that she met Chad, was still alive. He's murdered shortly thereafter. And Tammy's still alive, his wife. Yeah. They're both married to other people, but they're texting back and forth. One of the texts, he thanks her for having a good time in the shower that morning. They're in different states. They're not even in the same place, but they had a shower that morning together. I think she traveled through a portal, and yeah, this case is just really weird, and it's going to get weirder because this FBI supervisor is still on a stand, and we expect that today he's going to get into the storm. I don't know if you guys remember the storm from Lori's trial, but it's a reference that she makes to one of his body parts. I'm just going to leave it at that. We'll talk about it tomorrow after this guy testifies to it. Really interesting. So today, though, this supervisor testified about texts that Chad was sending to Lori about this novel that he had written about James and Elena that had met in a prior life and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, during Lori's trial, I recorded this novel. And he was sending it to her in bits and pieces, but I've recorded the whole thing for you, and I'm just going to replay that now. Here you go. Friday morning, October 26th, driving south on the freeway, a voice said, "You will meet an extraordinary woman today who will change your life forever." This was shocking, since such a thing seemed very unlikely at this conference. It is actually a very detailed story that began long ago on another world, and I will cover that part as I go along and the characters figure things out. But on the morning of October 26th, James arrived at St. George, still a bit baffled by the message he had received. He unloaded his books and set up his table, then joined the organizers for dinner in the main room. He saw his friend, Melanie Gibb, who had been so helpful to him when he spoke in Mesa that July. Melanie introduced James to her friend, Elena. When their hands touched, he felt a shock pass through him, and his heart started beating fast. Elena was gorgeous and vivacious, and James was a little intimidated, yet honored that she would talk to him. He was happily surprised when she mentioned a key part of his novel, The Renewed Earth. No one had ever recognized the significance of that scene before. He had heard that voice before and seen that smile before. He felt they had even talked like this before. But who could be certain when? It was strange. But he could remember. The feelings were very strong, as if they had known each other oh so long. They didn't get many chances to talk after that because he had to help voice a woman's blue Muppet. But he watched her every chance he could. He had to stay at a relative's house that night, but he hardly slept. He kept envisioning himself with Elena in very wonderful situations that indicated they had been more than just friends. James was the first speaker on Saturday morning and knew exactly where Elena was sitting. He made sure to mention the scene from his book that they had discussed the previous evening. He was completely smitten by her and even was nervous of what she would think of his talk as he spoke. But when he would glance at her, she was always attentive and watching him, unlike the rest of the crowd. After his talk, he went to his book table. His talk had gone well, and there was a good group gathered around to buy books. His heart nearly leaped out of his chest when he saw Elena, and she joined him and helped him sell the books. She was so beautiful that he could hardly concentrate on the customers. She straightened the books and gave the books great reviews, although she made him laugh a lot when she kept pushing The Youth and 5 volumes of his first series. He could only giggle when people asked if she was his wife. Because yes, in fact, she was. She just didn't know it yet. James was definitely having amorous feelings towards Elena as they sold books together. He had not felt this happy in his entire life. He was quite sure this was the woman the voice had told him about. James was ecstatic because he had already fallen deeply in love with her, or better said, he remembered how much he already loved her. Her eyes had mesmerized him the moment they met, but once the book sales slowed down, she stood near him behind the table. They looked deeply into each other's eyes for the first time, and he knew he was in the presence of a goddess. He resisted an impulse to kiss her, but his entire body was on fire. He instinctively knew she was everything he had ever dreamed of. I must clarify that James is a very difficult person to get information from. He has been blessed with great knowledge, but 99% of the people he knows do not realize that. He's very guarded, and it is a great task to gain his trust. But as Elena leaned forward and asked a couple of very insightful questions, his heart burst with joy. He knew she was one of the very few people on earth he could trust. James' spirit was so excited at this revelation that he shattered a thick veil that had been placed between these two souls during their mortal lives. The thick veil had been placed because of the unique, unparalleled love James and Elena had shared in previous lifetimes. That veil had prevented them from finding each other until this appointed day that would be remembered throughout the heavens as the true beginning of a spectacular mission that would save millions of souls and defeat the forces of darkness. James' physical attraction to Elena was almost overwhelming, but he was equally drawn to the spiritual energy that was radiating from her. As they talked, it was confirmed to him that they had indeed been married before and were eternal companions. He had glimpses of them walking dusty paths together, and he realized they had been married during the life of Jesus Christ, as they had been very close to him. At this time, their spirits could not be restrained any longer, and a long-awaited make-out session took place in that lobby. This was manifest in the mortal world to James and Elena throughout the scientific phenomenon known as loin fire. As they talked, James had a burning desire to make love to her, but he wasn't sure she felt the same way. But they could not stay away from each other. One time she was sitting in a couch near his table, and he took a seat on a chair about 5 feet from her. She began to squirm and covered her body with her hands. She asked him, "What are you doing?" He wasn't aware of what she meant. All he knew was that if Bruce Porter hadn't been giving them an evil eye, a child would have been conceived on that couch. The erotic tension continued throughout the afternoon. James could only think of her. His desire for her was indescribable. Thankfully, she had worn 16 layers of clothing to survive the 80-degree weather, so he was not fully aware that she truly had the body of a goddess. Her dimensions were exactly what he had always fantasized about, but the revelation would have to wait a month. As the night concluded, James needed to take his empty boxes to his car. With Elena's help, he had sold more books at a show than he ever had before. She helped him carry the boxes to the car, and then he could not resist the desire to hug her. He had an awkward attempt that was way too brief because their friends were bringing more boxes. In that short embrace, though, he knew he had found the woman he had searched for his entire life. It was made crystal clear to him that they had been married before and would be again. He once again had to fight off a powerful urge to kiss her and somehow disguise the massive erection he was experiencing. They returned to the building, and he helped carry tables to the second floor while she sat on the couch. They couldn't take their eyes off each other. He was already madly in love. Her group of friends finally had to leave. He was devastated, unused to how he would ever contact her again. Then her spirit took over and asked him, "Can I get your cell number in case I have some questions?" They exchanged numbers, and then they gave each other a hug goodbye. It was the most wonderful, electric, delicious hug he had ever felt. Then he watched her walk away, knowing she was truly going to change his life forever. Now that's the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2. James sadly walked to his car after watching Elena's disappear down the hall, but he couldn't deny their connection and his absolute attraction to her. She still seemed way out of his league, but he nervously sent her a text before driving to his hotel. A minute passed, then 2, without a response. He kicked himself for thinking he ever had a chance with her. Then his phone buzzed. Elena had texted back. His heart soared, and over the next few hours they texted back and forth dozens of times. He knew she was staying at a home in Tokerville. He desperately wanted to drive there and whisk her back to the hotel for a night of reconnection and romance. He twice got redressed during the night to go see her, but the spirit gently said, "Have patience. Everything will work out as it's supposed to." They finally stopped texting at around 4 a.m., and when he closed his eyes to sleep, he was taken again to their previous life together. Their intense passion of their lovemaking was a sight to behold. He knew it would be difficult, but he could be patient if it meant he could experience that type of love just once in his life. As he lay in the hotel bed, it was as if her spirit had joined him. They wrapped around each other and kissed gently, then intensely, and the emotions they shared were not of this world. James woke up in the hotel room, feeling happier than he had in his entire life. It felt like he and Elena had fit together perfectly in every way. He rolled over to kiss her, and then reality struck. She was actually more than 20 miles away in Tokerville with her Arizona friends. He texted her, and she quickly responded. He deeply regretted not going to be with her the night before. It was as if he already knew the taste of her lips, and his hands knew every curve of her body. He knows his dreams was somehow real, and that they were actually traveling to each other in a higher dimension. He hungered for her in a way he didn't think was possible. The voice was right. Elena was going to change his life forever. He packed his suitcase and began driving north on the freeway. As each mile passed, James could feel Elena's spirit beckoning for him to join her. As he approached the Tokerville exit, it took every ounce of willpower to keep driving on the freeway. His attraction to her was beyond magnetic. He felt their souls were two halves of an eternal union. Tears filled his eyes as he passed the freeway exit. He desperately yearned to embrace her and tell her he deeply loved her, as crazy as that sounded. But he knew he would be seeing her 3 weeks later at a conference in Arizona. It seemed like an eternity away, but he sensed it would be a very significant weekend for them. He already was crazy about her, and his feelings of admiration and affection for her would only grow more intensely and wonderful. During his long drive home, James was able to text back and forth with Elena, and it was clear they were extremely compatible and shared the same interests. It felt like talking to a long-distance best friend. When he arrived home, he searched the internet for anything about her, but there was nothing. She was a fascinating mystery, and he wanted to spend the rest of eternity with. At the end of his drive, she suggested they talk on the phone the next day. He was thrilled at the thought of hearing her voice again. He was falling madly in love by the minute. When James heard her voice that Monday morning, the euphoria he had felt Saturday came rushing back strongly. They talked for 2 hours, but it seemed to be only minutes. He was obsessed with her and couldn't get enough. During the first conversation with Elena, James realized she already had strong understanding of many of the truths he had been taught regarding how their universe really worked. The lounge fire and obsession with each other had no real explanation unless they truly had a spiritual connection before this life. During the next week, they spoke every day for at least an hour, but often longer. They hungered to know everything about each other. This was a new experience for James to open up and share true feelings of his heart, but he knew he could trust her completely. The bond between them was intense, and only the vast distance between them kept their passion for each other from roaring into a blazing inferno. She quickly became his best friend, or better said, two best friends had reunited, and their prior love was now ignited again in a wonderful, heavenly way. As November began, James and Elena had talked on the phone every day since last seeing each other. He was extremely impressed with her intelligence, personality, and subtle humor that made him laugh more than he had in his lifetime. She was a complete delight to talk to, and the highlight of his day was when he could hear her magical voice. It was so familiar to him, and it actually healed and soothed his heart and soul. They would both attend the same event in mid-November, and it seemed like that day would never arrive. Each day they opened their hearts to each other over a little more. James knew he could trust her with the mysteries of the universe that had been revealed to him. He knew they had been married before, and they had been close friends with the Savior when he lived in Jerusalem. James had served in an important position in the Lord's church, and Elena had been his beloved spouse and best friend. Their relationship was now meant to continue in this lifetime. In Jerusalem, James and Elena had enjoyed tremendous intimacy. Their physical desire for each other was unmatched, and they were fortunate that they could be alone morning, noon, and night, and they seized every chance to passionately express their love to each other. They simply could never get enough, even after many years of marriage. Everyone knew they were crazy about each other, and they were a wonderful example of how spouses should cleave together in love and unity. James had visions of how they would happily and joyfully pleasure each other in his office. They had two favorite positions that particularly bonded them together. Nothing meant more to James than holding Elena in his arms and unifying their bodies in perfect synchronization. As James and Elena talked on the phone, he tried to delicately describe their connection to each other, and he was delighted that she believed him. He also shared that they had been married other times on a previous world, and she accepted that information as well. James was overjoyed to have these memories restored to him because he truly loved her with all his heart. He knew they were meant to be married again and complete important missions together before the second coming. He was ecstatic that she was receiving confirmation of these things as well. As they talked on the phone, the spiritual connection was so intense that he also produced physical desires, and it was as if their spirits were making love despite the great distance between them. James knew his spirit was visiting her during these connections. He also became aware that his spirit would visit her at night, and they would wrap around each other in a sensual embrace. Kissing her was so wonderful and real, and he knew that the next time they saw each other, he needed to kiss her. He wouldn't be able to resist holding her. He was absolutely in love with her in every way. By the time the conference arrived, James and Elena had become very close through their phone conversations, but he desperately needed to see her again. She agreed to pick him up at the airport and take him to his hotel. He was extremely nervous, worried that the spark they had felt earlier might not be there, but as she arrived at the airport and he opened the car door, his heart nearly burst at the sight of her smile. She was stunningly gorgeous, and as they gripped each other's hands, the electricity was tangible. The love between them was powerful and real. The hotel was only a short distance away, and he invited her into the room. They were soon standing alone in the room, and he put his arm around her and looked into her gorgeous blue eyes. They hungered for each other, and he leaned forward and fulfilled a promise he had made to her a few days earlier. He gently kissed her tender lips, and the same heavenly electricity filled his entire body. The passionate magic they had felt many centuries earlier came surging back powerfully. James moved to the couch, and Elena straddled him effortlessly, as if they had done this thousands of times before. She fit perfectly on him, and they pressed their loins together against each other. The feeling was exquisite, and they both smiled and moaned at the sensations passing between them. They were still fully clothed, and the intensity of the intimacy was undeniable. It's getting heated. Okay. Is it hot in here? Okay. James felt the powerful desire to bless Elena at that time. As they stayed in that favorite position, he moved his hands to her head and began to cleanse and purify each part of her body. He could feel the pains and troubles she had endured throughout her life being removed from her soul and being taken outside and destroyed. James' hands worked their way down her body and lingered briefly on her beautiful breasts. She truly had the body of a goddess, and he was experiencing an indescribable mix of physical and spiritual ecstasy. He soon concluded the cleansing of her body from head to toe, then filled her body with a balm of light and love. James could see the happiness in her eyes, and instinctively their mouths came together again. The fire was burning strongly with them both, and as their kissing grew more intensely, he gently said, "I love you, Elena." Those words sparked a frenzy in him. Their tongues effortlessly entwined, and their hips gyrated in a smooth, erotic rhythm. Two lovers, long separated, were finally united in heavenly bliss. After a few minutes of excitement, pleasure, and fun on the couch, James and Elena both felt compelled to change into more comfortable clothing. James out in some athletic shorts and a blue shirt, and Elena put on a stunning black top and tight leggings. The top revealed just enough, but not too much, and James was overjoyed at the sight. James took her in his arms, and they smiled at each other. The vibration in the room was intense, and their hearts reached out to each other in a glorious reunion. James gently touched the sides of Elena's breasts, and he was in ecstasy. She stood on her tiptoes and gave him a sensual kiss that sent electricity through his body. They moved towards the bed and were quickly entwined around each other. She was so beautiful, loving, and enchanting that James could hardly breathe. They were both aroused, but knew there were limitations or what could occur that night. But they kissed for nearly an hour and pressed against each other tightly. Toward the end of the evening, Elena laid on her stomach at the end of the bed, and James caressed her fabulous body. He grasped her perfect bottom with both hands and expressed how much she loved that. She soon sat up and straddled him again as they passionately kissed farewell. They knew they would see each other again in the morning, but in separation seemed too long. But they knew that the long wait to find their eternal match had come to an end, and James was overjoyed beyond description. James and Elena had agreed to visit the temple the following morning. She returned to the hotel room after an additional romance. On the couch, they calmed their nerves enough to give each other a blessing. As James placed his hands on her head, he connected with Elena's true eternal self. He knew he was in the presence of an exalted goddess who had returned to earth to perform a special mission. This mission included being with him, and they would progress together as translated beings. The full plan wasn't yet completely clear to him, but the immense power radiating from her confirmed his belief that she was among the greatest women in the universe. She then gave him a tremendous blessing that helped him realize how much she truly loved him and wanted to be with him forever. He was truly, deeply humbled that such an incredible woman regarded him so highly. His heart burned as she blessed him, and he had glimpses come to his mind, and not only their life in Jerusalem, but even as a couple on a previous earth. He knew they had been eternal companions for eons and that their love was beyond celestial. They embraced, following the blessing, and the emotions they felt were a mixture of eternal bliss and celestial desire. The sexual chemistry was undeniable, but the spiritual unity was a glorious bonus for them both. They had only known each other for 3 weeks, but two lonely, misunderstood souls had finally found their best friend that they could trust and confide in. They arrived at the temple, and they both felt they should do sealings together. They were soon seated in a sealing room, facing each other. Elena looked so stunning as she smiled at him. She seemed calm, and he felt quite nervous. Their opportunity soon came to kneel across the altar from each other. And as the sealer pronounced those sacred words, James and Elena knew that they were now sealed as husband and wife for eternity. As the earthly sealing was taking place, a similar scene involving their spirits was happening on a higher plane, where they kissed and unified their souls. They knew they had just begun a new journey together that was eternal and never-ending. After the sealing, they went to lunch together, and they felt so comfortable together. Everything felt so right. James could look into her eyes forever, unless he was gently kissing her and telling her how much he loved her. Even when they held hands, there was a powerful vibration that exceeded the celestial world. They attended the conference, but their thoughts were completely focused on each other, and James gave a talk that was well received and sparked great interest in his books. Elena joined him at the selling table, and they sold more than 359 books within a couple of hours. But all they really wanted was to slip away and express their love to each other. They went to dinner with some friends, but afterward they were able to find some time alone. They drove to a secluded area and slipped into the back seat. Elena was wearing a pair of incredibly sexy jeans, and as she straddled James in the back seat, he once again grasped her fantastic bottom. She pushed him back into the reclining position, and their loins fit perfectly together. They kissed passionately and rhythmically pulsated against each other. Their love was intense and undeniably real. James was now madly crazy in love with her, and it was so wonderful to know she felt the same about him. One powerful moment happened earlier that day when Elena was listening to another speaker while James stayed at the table, but he thought he heard Elena say, "Come stand behind me." He went into the room and saw her standing against a wall. He moved behind her, and they discreetly touched. After a few minutes, he checked his phone and saw she had texted him that very sentence. At the stone, he heard her voice. It was a wonderful testament that they were already communicating with each other on a higher level. They helped clean up the conference, and Elena graciously allowed James to stay in a spare bedroom at her home that night. They visited with other friends until after midnight, and then they all went to bed. James anxiously hoped Elena would join him in the spare room. It took a while for everyone to settle into their beds, but once the house quieted down, James opened his door slightly and saw the wondrous sight of Elena approaching the room. They locked the door behind her and quickly got under the covers. He was wearing his athletic shorts, and she was wearing tight, thin leggings and a loose top. They clung to each other and kissed desperately, hungrily. James placed his hands under her top and caressed her splendid breasts. She moaned happily and wrapped her legs around his waist. Only two thin layers of material separated their loins, and they could feel each other's most intimate body parts in detail. The intensity and spiritual vibration exceeded anything either one of them had ever felt before. They knew their spirits were actually intimately joined together, and it felt like they had left the terrestrial world. Elena soon got on top of James, and the rhythmic ecstasy continued for several more minutes. Toward the end, they both removed their tops, and they pressed their bodies together, skin on skin. They fit together perfectly, and their kisses were deep and frenzied. Their desire for each other was beyond compare. As the reunion in the spare room came to a conclusion, Raphael knew Elena was his perfect match. They longed to stay entwined together, but it would be best to separate and get some rest. But by 6 a.m., James couldn't stand to be away from her any longer. He slipped into her bedroom and stood at her bedside. She was unbelievably gorgeous, and he greatly desired to join her in the bed and continue the previous night's activities. But there were other guests in the house who weren't yet aware of their sizzling love for each other. So he gently touched her shoulder to awaken her. Her eyes opened, and she reached up and grabbed his arms to pull him into the bed. He smiled, realizing she wasn't fully awake, and she had likely been dreaming of him. He simply whispered that he loved her and hoped she would go walking with him through the neighborhood. James and Elena had enjoyed a walk together the previous morning along the quiet streets of the gated community. The sensual attraction between them had been intense, and they had touched shoulders and held hands as they walked. They were like magnets that couldn't be separated. She had worn exercise leggings that drove him crazy with desire. The leggings emphasized her perfectly sculpted bottom, and it took all his willpower not to pull her to him and grasp that bottom firmly and powerfully with both hands while kissing her passionately. They went walking again the next morning. Unfortunately, a friend invited herself along, but James and Elena were still completely engrossed in each other. He had to catch a flight home later that morning, but he was able to give Elena a special blessing before departing. As he placed his hands on her head, he felt their spirits connect with a surge of power. At that moment, his only dreams in life were to be with her as always throughout eternity, and that desire was continued to intensity. During the blessing, he was shown the great missions they would perform together. He knew this was an eternal union that would forever change the world. Tears filled his eyes in the presence of this holy goddess, and he was nearly overcome by the Spirit as he sensed her true place in the universe as a majestic archangel. The end. I noticed he called himself Raphael one time, because sometimes he'll call himself Raphael. But, man, I need a shower. What an interesting book, story. They're like teenagers. Oh my God. Yeah, and they really believe this stuff. Oh my gosh. So, I'm interested. What do you think? Leave me a comment. Is he a great romance novel writer? What do you think? I hope you enjoyed that. And if I have time, I will put up a second video today with the continuation of Melanie Gibbs' testimony, because there's more to that. All about those portals that I just mentioned that she passes through. Yeah. Anyway, have a great day, everybody. I will see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.